Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I have the huge pleasure of having with me Dr. Jane Thomason. Dr. Jane, welcome.
Hi, how are you? It's such a pleasure to be on your first podcast.
No, it's actually my pleasure. Thank you very much for accepting my invite. As most of you will know, Dr. Jane is actually a pioneer for blockchain and frontier technologies for a sustainable future. She's the co-founder of the British Blockchain and Frontier Technology Association and industry associate, University College London, Centre for Blockchain London. She sits on the editorial board, Frontiers in Blockchain, Global Health Journal, and Journal of the Metaverse. She has authored the books Blockchain Technology for a Global Social Change and Blockchaining the World, and also Applied Ethics in a Digital World, which are all of them great books. She advises multiple blockchain, DeFi, NFT, and metaverse projects. She was featured in Forbes in 2018 as a blockchain's leading social evangelist, and in multiple awards including Thinkers 360, Top 20 Global Thought Leaders and Influencers on Health, Tech, and Blockchain, and also sustainability. She has provided expert advice on blockchain to the WHO, OECD, ADB, USAID, and Commonwealth Secretariat. So, as I said before, thank you very much for being here today, Dr. Thomason. I would like to start today by talking about your personal journey. First of all, congratulations on your amazing journey and also on your amazing leadership. In your website, you mention that you are a total novice with zero knowledge of either blockchain or cryptocurrencies before, to the point that you were not very interested in these latest technologies. So actually, you started in the public health area. However, your journey since then has brought you into being a world leader in the field of blockchain, as I said before, recognized, for example, by Forbes in 2018 as a blockchain's leading social development evangelist. So can you please tell the listeners what made you decide to leap into this blockchain world?
I will. So it was really in two parts. One part was most of my working history's been in emerging economies in very, very difficult settings, largely in public health, but also governance and women's empowerment. So I really understood some of the challenges that the poorest people in the world are facing. Then in 2010, my son actually told me to buy Bitcoin, and I completely ignored him. So it was about 10 cents at that time. And then he came back in 2016 when I think it might have been $2,000 or $3,000. And he said, "Mom, did you buy any Bitcoin when I told you to?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, it's now $3,000. Now, Mom, you have to listen to me this time. Bitcoin is built on blockchain, and this is going to change everything, and you need to learn about it." So I felt really guilty. So I started reading about it and learning about it. And it took me quite a long time because it's very counterintuitive to the way that we grew up, because we believe in centralized systems, centralized governance. And it took me a while to really get why I should be interested in blockchain. And then one day I was just kind of thinking about it, and it came into my mind. We had worked in Indonesia after the Banda Aceh tsunami, where 200,000 people lost their lives. And I had been up there and seen the devastation that happened. But what I suddenly thought about was, it wasn't just so many people were lost. No one knew who they were. No one knew who the people that were left behind were. All the bank records were lost. All the health records were lost. All of the land records were lost. And then donors started coming in and trying to send money to people, and there was no way for them to do that and make sure that it got to the right people. And all of these things kind of came together, and I just had this aha moment about kind of blockchain in humanitarian and crisis settings, because if they'd had a secure blockchain-based identity based on a biometric, and they were able to reconnect with that, we would know who people were. We would know who had what in the bank accounts, the land records, the health records, and it just would have made, it wouldn't have changed the tragedy, but it would have made the rebuilding so much easier. So that was very powerful for me. And I thought, I can see how this is going to change things, and I need to tell people about it. So that's how I got started.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this with me. Actually, one of the articles that I wrote a while ago was called blockchain, a technology that can change the world. No, so I think in that sense you summarized pretty well that same idea as well. No, a blockchain can actually and is right now changing the world in so many ways. So focusing more now on the area of blockchain, being one of the world's most important blockchains, leading social evangelists, how would you describe like the benefits or advantages offered by blockchain compared to other technologies?
You know, that's a question that I really don't want to answer, but I will briefly, because I think the minute you start getting lost in the technology, then you lose the fundamental purpose of what the technology can do for you. I mean, you know, briefly speaking, it's a distributed ledger, it's peer-to-peer, there's no centralized control of the network, and it allows complete transparency of transactions, and it allows things to be done that have never really been done before in decentralized ways. And it's being seen, you know, the one that people know the most is crypto, but the whole explosion of DeFi and NFTs, and now the work in gaming and the metaverse, is showing people in a real way how this has actually impacted on people's lives during the pandemic. So just a small example. So when the cash shops shut down, when government shut down in places like the Philippines, there were small micro entrepreneurs in villages who used to sell Netflix and Spotify cards, but they couldn't get the foreign exchange to buy those cards because the traditional banks and cash shops had shut down. So they started using blockchain remittance providers, and they were able to send tiny, tiny amounts of money, get their Netflix and Spotify cards, and continue to do their businesses. So it enabled these things that were not possible with the traditional infrastructure, which was all closed down. And there are many examples of that kind of innovation that's just sprung up and accelerated during the pandemic.
Thank you very much for sharing. You also mentioned in an interview that blockchain, if properly deployed and scaled, could actually solve some of the global problems of our time, like climate change and poverty. So how do you think that the blockchain could solve climate change?
So let me talk about a project that I'm actually involved in at the moment, which is really quite exciting. So back in, I think, 2017, I actually wrote in a book by Alistair Mark on blockchain and climate finance and green prosperity, about how I believe that blockchain was going to be able to help with climate and environmental problems for the poor. But what we're working on at the moment, just as an example, is that blockchain can enable the tokenization of carbon credits. And we're working on a project at the moment that will tokenize carbon credits from carbon registries and allow them to be traded in a marketplace. But what we're also going to do is make those carbon credits into NFTs, and then we're going to add some gamification so people can actually play games, take positive climate actions, and compete to win some of those carbon credit NFTs, but also to make sure, and this is where I think the power of blockchain is now, to make sure that we're actually giving back to the people in the emerging markets who are largely creating the carbon offsets. So I heard of another project. If you think about it, someone got in touch with me. They're thinking, how do we preserve the Amazon rainforest? Because one of the problems we have at the moment is that the custodians of the Amazon rainforest, they get no income, they get no incentive to keep the rainforest. Whereas if people want the wood, or if people want to clear the forest and plant some crop, then they can get money. So So this other project is looking at, well, how can we incentivize the owners of the rainforest to preserve the rainforest so they can get some income just from preserving the forest? And they're looking at different ways to be able to both incentivize the custodians to keep the forest, but also allow people like you and me, if we care about the forest, to invest in that project so that we can be contributing to the creation of incentives for the owners of the forest, or even maybe, you know, buying an investment in one of those trees and investing to keep it there in the ground. So there's lots of exciting projects going on at the moment that I think they're not going to solve the climate problem by themselves, but they can really contribute, particularly in the area of voluntary carbon markets.
It's actually great to hear about so many projects going on, like this one you mentioned now from the Amazon rainforest. Regarding the other area, because we talked about climate change and poverty, so about poverty, I mean, blockchain can actually be indeed a very effective tool when promoting financial inclusion. I myself, for example, currently co-lead the Financial Inclusion Working Group at the Global Impact FinTech Forum, GIFT. And I've done actually extensive research on the areas of CBDCs and cryptos and how those two, both CBDCs and cryptos, can become effective tools when it comes to promoting financial inclusion and thus allowing unbanked people to become part of their respective financial systems. So, I mean, in your opinion, how can blockchain help promote financial inclusion? And secondly, like a second question regarding that, do you think that most governments are doing enough in that area, or there is much more that could be done?
So I think that the big thing about the possibilities of blockchain and financial inclusion are that we've now got more than 70% of the world with mobile coverage. So that it means that anyone who's got a mobile phone has the potential to be able to be included in the economic system. And we used to talk about unbanked, but I make the point now, why do you need a bank if in the palm of your hand you've got a mobile phone that's going to enable you to carry out all of the financial transactions that you need? So I think that's the first thing. So we have the ability to be able to reach people. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment, and I'll give you an example of one project I particularly like with Sophie Blackstead and Hived Online. And she's working with women's cooperatives in Niger, which is a very difficult country to work in. And she's working with the cooperatives to essentially digitize them and allow people to transact, but also do things like create credit scores, because people who don't have bank accounts and don't have the requisite money and identity details and so forth to have a bank account can never get credit, and they're, you know, preyed on by loan sharks. So that's a really interesting project. And if you go to the international humanitarian community, they've actually been conducting research about looking at the possibility of creating or accessing a stable coin that would be able to be used in humanitarian settings, because 80% of humanitarian work is either direct cash grants to people or supply chain logistics, and blockchain's got a lot to be able to contribute in both of those areas. So just to your second part of the question, which is in relation to governments, I think the answer to that is very much, it depends. And so different parts of the world are reacting quite differently to blockchain. Some are seeing it as a threat and threaten to shut it down. Others, like small states, and if you think of, you know, Gibraltar, Malta, Liechtenstein, Bermuda, Serbia, and, you know, countless other small countries, have actually embraced getting good crypto regulations in place and embraced the possibilities of being able to make this available to their population. And probably, you know, the most famous or infamous one of the moment is El Salvador, that's actually declared that Bitcoin is legal tender. And I mean, you know, this is a social experiment that we're all watching with great interest, but there is no doubt Yes, there is no doubt that, there's a real range in what governments are doing. But the other thing that's happening, and this is what I think makes governments uncomfortable, is because these essentially borderless 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week economies that continue to operate across multiple jurisdictions, the regulators are struggling to be able to catch up to kind of figure out how they can keep people safe in this space and how they can allow innovation, but not to the extent that it is damaging to consumers or damaging to, the monetary system. So I think they're the kinds of things that are going on.
I agree. And actually, this case that you mentioned now, El Salvador, is very interesting for like all of us who are part of this industry, because it's so new and so groundbreaking that no one knows for sure how it's going to end up, but it's good to see people trying different and bold things, and regardless of the outcome, I guess as a social experiment, it's actually good, to be able to see what they're doing. Then I wanted to ask you as well about the idea of global social change, because actually the title of one of your books is Blockchain Technology for a Global Social Change. So how would you define this idea of global social change? And according to you, how can blockchain achieve it or help to achieve it?
So what we do in the book, and actually after this, I want to send you, we have a kind of model for the way that we saw it, the forces at play, the opportunities with the technology in the future. And we make the case, we go through a number of different areas, from government to humanitarian to healthcare to agriculture, and we examine a whole series of different use cases and talk about how they are creating this kind of change. But I think that, the big change is going to be what we call the democratization of almost everything. So whether that's around finance or healthcare or education, you're going to be able to give people access through a peer-to-peer system to many services and many types of kind of education, access, investment and things that they never had before. And this, on the one hand, is incredibly powerful and exciting. And on the other hand, I think if you're an international organization or if you're a sovereign government, is probably very disconcerting, because the whole of our kind of global governance and national governance is formed around the notion of a centralized form of government. And so people are struggling with, how do you govern decentralized autonomous organizations? How do you govern these metaverses that are popping up and being embraced by the gaming community, where millions of people are being engaged in the creation of these new economies and new forms of work? So, I think that, we wrote that book in 2017, 2018. We're now a few years ahead of that, and we really need to update it, because what we're seeing now is some of the things that we actually predicted back then, which is exciting, as well as some new things that we hadn't even imagined.
No, indeed, everything's going so fast in this area. 1 year ago, not many people were talking about NFTs or the metaverse, and right now it's like everywhere. So I think it's important to catch up, especially this one goes to the listeners, because it keeps changing so fast and so much that you need to be like alert all the time. You also wrote extensively on the area of empowering poor women and girls, mentioning and this is actually a quote that I like very much, that in this decade of women, we must harness these digital tools and our collective ambition to create a connected and distributed token economy to transform lives of women and girls across the globe and achieve quantum impact. How do you think that can actually be put into practice?
Well, it's really interesting. I've been working on that idea with a good friend and colleague in Lisbon, Professor Kathy Mulligan, and we've been, looking at how we can possibly build a token economy that's going to be around the advancement and empowerment of women. And literally this week, someone contacted me and said, look what we're building. And so someone's already, started building that. So I think it's kind of a matter of looking at where it is that you want to focus on. And our focus is on, kind of economic empowerment of women, building the women's economy, and making sure that a fair share of startup funds are supporting women-led businesses. But others are looking at, women and gender equality. Others are looking at women and human trafficking. Others are looking at women's and children's health. So there's a whole range of ways that people are looking at the needs of women and children with a blockchain lens, and very much often through the creation of these token economies, but not only, because let's say, for example, childhood vaccinations or access to antenatal treatment, it's about how you can transform the healthcare system to be able to directly target women and girls and make sure that they get the treatment and care that they need, and maybe even incentivize them or their families to make sure they get to deliver their babies with supervision and so forth. So there's so much going on. It's very fast moving and it's incredibly exciting.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's actually very exciting and fast moving. So yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Now I would like to ask you about a different area related to blockchain, which is that of NFTs and GameFi. I was reading one of your recent articles published by Cointelegraph, in which you mentioned that GameFi is the NFT area where the real value is being created. Why? And also I wanted to ask you, can you provide us maybe with some practical examples of companies or use cases of companies which use NFTs and blockchain in general for gaming? Because I know that this area of gaming is not currently booming. No, I mean the gaming industry is becoming like one of the most important industries. No, so trying to see how blockchain is used in that industry is actually something very relevant and interesting, I think.
For me, the two big opportunities with the gaming, one is that they have now figured out using NFTs, the ability for gamers. They've always battled and they've got swords and other weapons and chests of gold and other things they needed in their quests. They've always done that, but they didn't previously have the ability either to take them from game to game or convert them into money. And so now that capacity is there. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, which for me is so exciting, is this growth of play to earn games. So perhaps the most famous one at the moment is Axie Infinity, which really took off during the pandemic, and literally thousands of people earned an income through playing these play to earn games that kept their families out of poverty during the pandemic. But also the creators of that game found ways that if you didn't have enough money to start playing the game because you have to buy these Axie creatures, then I can actually allow you to use mine and then you pay me a proportion of your winnings. So you don't have to put up any money up front and you can play. And if you're skilled, you can win. And then I, as the owner of the Axies, can also get benefit. And literally people are making, across a number of emerging countries, millions of dollars from the Yield Guild games, which is another gaming company. Another one that, I'm very excited about that I've been getting to see here in Dubai is one called Studium, which is going to be not play to earn, but learn to earn. So it's actually one of these new forms of highly created micro-educational tools, but it's also going to have a metaverse and a gamification element to really incentivize people to learn some specific skills or knowledge for which they're going to get rewarded through a kind of gamified approach to learning. And I'm excited about that because I think that this is the future of education. I think education as we know it children are not engaged at school. They don't find what they're being taught to be relevant to them. And indeed, in my country, we're teaching kids for the last 50 years, not the next 50 years. And it will be these highly curated precision education platforms that are going to be the future of education. So this one, you actually get paid to learn things. And I think that's amazing.
No, it is indeed. I myself, holding a PhD as well, I've had to be in the world of academia and education for I mean, quite a few years now, and I could see myself, what you just mentioned as well, now this idea that the way we are educating in most countries is that of the last maybe 50 years, no, but we are not thinking about the next 51. So I think trying to change that is actually remarkable. And now to wrap this very interesting conversation up, I would like to ask you what opportunities and challenges do you foresee in the NFT and metaverse areas, or the blockchain industry in general? And when I say challenges and opportunities, I'm not talking about like specific companies or any investment advice, you know, I'm just talking about use cases or areas in general.
So the challenge for me, and it's something that, you know, obviously we just wrote about in our book, Applied Ethics in a Digital Age, is how we can make sure, because the metaverse, for example, we're creating worlds that people will inhabit and spend a lot of time in. And we need to be thinking while these worlds are being built about ethical issues and making sure that people don't come to harm in the way that those worlds are constructed. So I think there's a huge conversation and a lot of unknowns about how to make sure that people are protected and safe in these worlds as we try and keep them safe in the real world. So I think that that's one of the challenges. I think the other one is really just imagining. Now we can see what the technology can do, imagining how it can help with climate change, how it can help with healthcare, how we can give access to the poor some of the benefits of these distributed communities that are rewarding so many people. So I think one thing is building it safely and trying to make sure that the people who are doing that are doing it in a safe way. And the second one is, and I think that's maybe where people like you and I come in, is we need to be like the oracles of the future, which is the NFT is not just about Nifty Gateway and a crypto punk. NFTs are ways that we're going to be able to give many, many, many people access to digital assets of all sorts of different kinds that are going to work to their benefit. And we need to explain that to governments, to organizations, to industry in the world, because the majority of people don't have any idea about this whatsoever.
I agree, and I must say that I enjoyed this conversation very much, because generally speaking, many people just focus on how blockchain or cryptos can make us wealthier, which is fine, of course. I mean, as any investment or any means of payment, you can, of course, use them to become wealthier. But at the same time, I think there's much more to it, no? And there is much more to it in the sense that we can use those technologies to make an impact, no? To help poor people, to help poor women, for example, as you said before, etc. No? So, and I think in that sense, it's been a very interesting, discussion, no? To try to see that in blockchain, there's much more than just trying to make money out of trading cryptos, for example, which is something great to do, but there's much more to it than that. This concludes our first podcast. I would like to thank you, Dr. Jane Thomason, for being my first guest. It's been a pleasure. And do you have like any final remarks or thoughts that you wanted to share with our listeners?
I do. And look, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I really hope you have a wonderful success with it. But I think my message is, like, we have learned through this pandemic, this was a pandemic of inequality. And we must learn through this to rethink not just looking after the rich with the economic system, but looking after everyone and looking after the planet as well. So I think that we have the opportunity to rethink and rebuild the world that we live in, and blockchain and other technologies, not just blockchain, are giving us opportunities to contribute to that. So, you know, the future of the world is in our hands, and it's up to us what kind of a world we create.
I agree. That's actually very wise. It's a very wise thought. So, I mean, you all heard it. It's all up to us. So we need to make a better world, not just through the use of blockchain, but through the use of, well, all the new technologies. We need to try to make this impact. Well, thank you very much once again, Dr. Thomason, and thank you to all the listeners for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and stay tuned for the next episodes of this podcast. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Good night.